You didn't know it at the time, but there was a room you were never invited into. A room where your name was spoken carefully. A room where decisions were drafted about your future as if heaven had no vote. Conversations happened behind closed doors. Plans were laid out. Strategies were whispered. They thought they were being wise. They thought they were being strategic. They believed they were protecting their interests. But what they didn't realize was that every word spoken about you echoed into eternity. Chosen one, they tried to decide your future without God. Some of them smiled in your face while building alternative paths that didn't include you. Some of them assumed you were too small, too inexperienced, too overlooked to ever rise beyond what they had already concluded. They labeled you quietly. They reduced you privately. They drafted outcomes where you would stay limited, dependent, controlled. And in their minds, it was settled. But heaven was listening. You see, there is something people forget when they attempt to orchestrate outcomes outside of God's will. They forget that God does not need an invitation to enter a room. He does not need credentials to override a conversation. He does not need permission to dismantle agreements that were formed in pride. While they were speaking, God was watching. While they were deciding, God was calculating. While they were aligning against you, heaven was aligning for you. And this is where it shifts. Because what they didn't account for was this: when God places His hand on someone, no committee can remove it. No private discussion can cancel it. No hidden vote can veto it. They were planning from a limited perspective. They were calculating based on visible factors. But God was moving from covenant. They saw your present. God saw your assignment. They saw your weaknesses. God saw your capacity. They saw your silence. God saw your preparation. There were moments when you felt the shift, even if you couldn't explain it. Doors closed unexpectedly. Opportunities seemed to dissolve without warning. Relationships shifted tone overnight. You wondered if something was wrong with you. You wondered if maybe you had misheard God. You questioned your direction. You questioned your timing. But what you didn't know was that some of those closed doors were the result of conversations you never heard. And God allowed certain closures not to punish you, but to protect you. Because if those plans had succeeded, you would have stepped into rooms where your oil would have been drained, where your calling would have been diluted, where your voice would have been managed instead of magnified. They tried to design a future for you that was smaller than what God ordained. And here's what shakes them now: it didn't work. You're still here. You're still rising. You're still carrying something they cannot explain. There is a resilience in you that confuses them. A favor around you that frustrates them. A peace within you that they cannot access. And it is not because you are stronger than them. It is because God stepped into conversations you never heard and quietly overruled every conclusion. Some decisions were reversed without announcement. Some alliances dissolved without exposure. Some strategies collapsed without explanation. And you walked forward thinking it was coincidence. It wasn't. There is divine interference attached to your life. That's why certain betrayals never fully destroyed you. That's why certain setbacks didn't permanently delay you. That's why certain people who tried to box you and eventually had to step aside. God does not argue with every critic. He does not attend every meeting. But when it concerns His chosen, He intervenes in ways that leave no fingerprints, only outcomes. And here's what's deeper. The same people who tried to decide your future are beginning to sense that something shifted. They may not say it openly, but they feel it. They feel the grace on your life intensifying. They feel momentum building around you. They sense that what they attempted to suppress is starting to surface anyway. And it unsettles them. Because what do you do when the person you underestimated becomes unstoppable? What do you say when the narrative you crafted begins to collapse? What explanation do you offer when God rewrites what you finalized? Chosen one, this is not about revenge. This is about revelation. God is not exposing them to embarrass them. He is exposing the situation to elevate you. There is a difference. The plans formed against you were limited by human foresight. But the plan formed for you was sealed before you were born. And what you are stepping into next will make it undeniable that heaven had the final word. But here is the part they never saw coming. The very room where they tried to reduce you is about to become the room where your elevation is acknowledged. And when that shift happens, it will not just change your circumstances. It will expose who was really in control all along. There is something about divine reversal that no human strategy can predict. Because when God overrules something, He doesn't just cancel it quietly. He transforms the outcome so completely that the very thing meant to confine you becomes the evidence of your calling. You have to understand this now. What happened behind those closed doors was real. The conversations were intentional. The decisions were strategic. They thought they were being practical. They thought they were being responsible. Some of them even convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. But what they didn't realize is that you were never operating under their authority to begin with. You were operating under God's. And when God authorizes something, it doesn't matter how many voices oppose it. It doesn't matter how polished the argument sounds. It doesn't matter how official the decision appears. Heaven does not respond to consensus. Heaven responds to covenant. There were moments you felt sidelined. Moments you felt overlooked. Moments you sensed that opportunities were being quietly redirected away from you. And if you're honest, there were nights you asked God, why would you let this happen? But what if what felt like rejection was actually redirection? What if what looked like exclusion was protection? There is a scripture that carries weight in moments like this. Isaiah 54 verse 17 says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Notice what it says. It doesn't say weapons won't be formed. It doesn't say conversations won't happen. It doesn't say strategies won't be crafted. It says they will not prosper. That means the weapon may exist. The meeting may take place. The plan may be written. But prosperity, success, final victory, lasting damage, is denied. And that is exactly what happened in your story. They formed the plan. But it didn't prosper. They aligned their words. But it didn't produce the outcome they expected. They tried to decide your future without God. And that was their mistake. Because when God chooses someone, the decision is not based on popularity. It is not based on politics. It is not based on human preference. It is based on purpose. And purpose outranks opinion every time. You need to hear this clearly. You were not spared because you are perfect. You were spared because you are assigned. There is something on your life that cannot be negotiated away in private conversations. There is an anointing that cannot be voted out. There is a destiny that cannot be quietly reassigned to someone more convenient. And the reason things didn't collapse the way they intended is because God had already written a different ending. Some of the people involved are confused right now. They are watching circumstances shift in your favor that they thought they had secured against you. They are observing doors reopen that they were certain were sealed. They are noticing influence grow around you that they assumed would shrink. And they don't understand it. But you're beginning to. You're starting to see that the delays weren't denials. The silence wasn't abandonment. The isolation wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Because if you had stepped into the future they tried to script for you, you would have carried bitterness. You would have carried insecurity. You would have carried the need to prove something. Instead, God allowed the hidden resistance to refine you. He allowed you to feel the pressure without letting it crush you. He allowed the opposition to shape your discernment. You are sharper now. You are calmer now. You are less impressed by approval and less shaken by rejection. And that maturity is part of why the next door will open differently. There is also something else you must recognize. Not everyone in that room was malicious. Some were afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of change. Afraid of what your growth might mean for them. Fear makes people attempt to manage outcomes they don't trust God with. But here is the truth: God does not need their comfort to fulfill your calling. And the shift that is coming will not ask for their permission. It will simply happen. What you are about to step into will feel almost surreal. Not because it is random, but because it is redeemed. You will look back and realize that the setback created space. The delay created depth. The resistance created resilience. And the people who thought they were final authorities in your story will have to watch as God demonstrates that He alone writes the conclusion. But here is where it becomes even more intense. Because God doesn't just overrule for survival, He overrules for revelation. He wants it to be clear. Clear that this was not luck. Clear that this was not coincidence. Clear that this was not human favor alone. When the turnaround becomes visible, it will carry a weight to it. A gravity. A sense that something larger than strategy is unfolding. And some of the same voices that once spoke limitation will grow quiet. Not because they suddenly understand everything, but because they will recognize that something beyond them intervened. And what is about to unfold next will not just vindicate you, it will position you in a way that makes future opposition far more cautious. Because once people see what God does when they attempt to override Him, they think twice before trying again. And what God is preparing to reveal through you next will make it undeniable that the room you were excluded from was never the room that determined your destiny. There is a pattern God has followed throughout history, and if you look closely, your story is not as isolated as it feels. Think about Joseph. His brothers didn't just dislike him, they made a decision about his future. They stood together and agreed he would never become what he dreamed. They threw him into a pit, then sold him, convinced they had permanently altered his destiny. From their perspective, it was finished. The dreamer was handled. The threat was removed. But what they didn't understand is that when God gives a dream, human hands cannot suffocate it. Years later, the same Joseph they tried to erase was positioned in power, not because he fought them, not because he exposed them, but because God quietly elevated him in places they never saw coming. Now hear this carefully, your situation carries the same fingerprint. Maybe you weren't thrown into a literal pit. Maybe no one sold you. But decisions were made. Assumptions were signed off on. You were categorized, limited, quietly redirected. And the people involved believed they were being decisive. But they were only being temporary. God has always allowed human intention to expose divine sovereignty. He lets people speak. He lets them plan. He lets them act. And then, at the appointed time, He reveals who truly governs the outcome. And here's the part that should grip you. The pit didn't stop Joseph. It trained him. The betrayal didn't cancel him. It positioned him. The delay didn't destroy him. It matured him. So what if what happened to you wasn't just resistance? What if it was rehearsal? Pause there. Because if this was rehearsal, then what is coming is performance. If this was training, then what is ahead requires strength. If this was preparation, then the platform is bigger than you realized. That thought alone should shift your posture. There are real-life examples everywhere of people who were quietly sidelined only to emerge stronger. The employee passed over for promotion who later built something greater. The artist rejected by labels who later changed the industry. The student underestimated who later became the authority others consult. But here's the difference in your story: this is not just ambition at work. This is divine orchestration. And the reason the middle of your journey feels confusing is because God rarely announces His reversals while they are forming. He builds them quietly. While they thought you were shrinking, God was expanding your capacity. While they believed you were losing influence, God was refining your character. While they assumed you were discouraged, God was deepening your endurance. Now here's the hook you cannot ignore. What if the very people who tried to determine your ceiling are about to witness your acceleration? What if the next season unfolds in such a way that they have no choice but to acknowledge something beyond the moved? Because elevation hits differently when it follows opposition. And God is not careless with elevation. He does not raise you to embarrass others. He raises you to establish evidence. Evidence that when He speaks over a life, no private counsel can overturn it. You may not feel powerful right now. You may still feel like you are rebuilding. But power in God's hands does not look loud at first. It looks steady. It looks consistent. It looks faithful. And that is who you have been. Faithful when unseen. Faithful when misunderstood. Faithful when excluded. That faithfulness is what secures the next step. And I need you to understand something deeply personal. God did not overrule those conversations just to let you survive quietly. He overruled them because your life carries influence beyond what you see. There are people watching you right now who don't even realize they are drawing courage from your resilience. Your refusal to collapse under silent opposition is inspiring strength in others who face similar rooms, similar whispers, similar decisions made without them. This is bigger than you. And yet, it is deeply about you. Because the security you are about to feel will not come from applause. It will come from alignment. From knowing that even when humans misjudged you, heaven never did. There is a pride forming inside you, not arrogance, not ego, but holy confidence. The kind that says, if God defended me when I didn't even know I needed defense, then what can truly threaten me? That confidence will anchor you. It will steady your voice. It will refine your presence. And when the next opportunity opens, and it will, you will step into it without the desperation to prove anything. You will walk insecure. You will stand in assured. You will move in aware. Aware that behind every visible breakthrough was an invisible override. Chosen one, you are not rising because people approved you. You are rising because God protected you. And the pride you are beginning to feel is not rebellion. It is recognition. Recognition that you were never as vulnerable as they thought. Recognition that your future was never as fragile as it looked. Recognition that even when you were unaware, you were covered. But what is about to happen next will not just confirm that coverage. It will require you to step into a level of authority you haven't yet embraced. There is a moment in every chosen life when protection turns into promotion. You've felt covered. You've seen how things didn't collapse the way they were supposed to. You've watched doors reopen that were quietly shut. But now something different is building. This is not just about surviving what they tried to script. This is about stepping into what God already signed. And here is the truth that shifts everything. Protection is passive, but authority is active. God did not overrule those conversations just to keep you safe. He overruled them because He intends to trust you with influence. That's why the pressure increased before the shift. That's why the silence stretched longer than you expected. Authority requires weight. And weight requires strengthening. There is a scripture that reveals this transition clearly. In Revelation 3 verse 8, it says, "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." Notice the order. The door is placed by God. Not negotiated. Not voted on. Placed. And then comes the promise, no one can shut it. Not the same people who tried before. Not new voices that may arise. Not hidden opposition forming again. If God places it, it stands. Now pause and lean into this question. What if the open door is closer than you think? What if the reason you've felt restless lately is not because something is wrong, but because something is about to open? There is a difference between anxiety and anticipation. Anxiety feels chaotic. Anticipation feels charged. And what you've been sensing isn't fear. It's movement. The same God who protected you in silence is about to position you in visibility. And visibility requires something from you. It requires confidence without arrogance. Boldness without bitterness. Clarity without revenge. Because here is where many people misunderstand divine elevation. They assume it's about proving critics wrong. But God's elevation is about proving His word right. When the door opens, it will not come with an announcement explaining all the past resistance. It will simply present itself. An opportunity. A platform. A connection. A breakthrough. And it may look smaller than you imagined at first. Don't underestimate it. Joseph's first elevation wasn't a throne. It was responsibility in a house. David's first elevation wasn't a crown, it was a battlefield assignment. God often tests stewardship before He displays sovereignty. And here's the curious tension you need to hold. The people who once tried to decide your future may still be watching when this door opens. They may not apologize. They may not acknowledge what they attempted. But they will notice. And something in them will recognize that what they couldn't control, God commanded. Now let's go deeper. Authority is not loud. It doesn't scramble. It doesn't beg for validation. It stands grounded because it knows where it was placed from. You are entering a season where you won't need to explain yourself as much. The fruit will speak. The stability will speak. The consistency will speak. And the same room that once excluded you will no longer intimidate you. Why? Because your confidence will not be rooted in their approval. It will be rooted in divine placement. There is also a refining happening internally. You're noticing it. You react less. You observe more. You speak with intention. You move strategically. That's not coincidence. That's maturity meeting opportunity. God does not elevate who you used to be. He elevates who you've become. And who you've become is someone who understands that destiny isn't grabbed, it's entrusted. Now here is the hook you cannot ignore. What if the next step God gives you will require you to confront the very environment that once underestimated you? Not to fight it. Not to expose it. But to lead within it. Because sometimes God doesn't remove you from the system that tried to sideline you. Sometimes He places you above it. And that changes everything. The humility you carried through resistance will now anchor you in leadership. The discernment you developed through betrayal will now protect your decisions. The resilience you built in isolation will now stabilize others. This is no longer just about you being defended. This is about you being entrusted. Entrusted with influence. Entrusted with visibility. Entrusted with responsibility. And responsibility is sacred. Because once God places that open door before you, walking through it is your obedience. You cannot shrink back now. You cannot doubt yourself now. You cannot let old whispers define new authority. The future they tried to design without God has already expired. The future God designed with purpose is about to surface. And when it does, you will feel something unfamiliar but powerful. Not relief, not surprise, but confirmation. Confirmation that you were never behind. Confirmation that you were never forgotten. Confirmation that heaven was always ahead of every human conversation. But the final shift, the one that will solidify everything, is not just about opportunity. It's about identity. And what you are about to understand about who you truly are will change how you carry every door that opens next. Identity is the final seal. Because once you understand who you are, no one can secretly negotiate your worth again. Up until now, much of this journey has been about what happened around you, the rooms, the conversations, the silent resistance, the divine protection. But this last shift is internal. It's personal. It's the moment where you stop seeing yourself as the one who was almost overlooked, and start seeing yourself as the one who was always appointed. They tried to decide your future without God. But now you see something clearly: your future was never up for debate. It was assigned. And that realization changes how you stand. There is a different posture forming in you. You're no longer scanning rooms to see who approves. You're no longer shrinking to make others comfortable. You're no longer over-explaining your vision to people who lack the capacity to understand it. Not because you've become hardened, but because you've become secure. Security is quiet. Security doesn't compete. Security doesn't panic when misunderstood. Security knows. And what you know now is this: if God stepped into hidden conversations to defend you, then you don't have to fight for validation in visible spaces. That truth alone should make you proud. Not pride rooted in ego, but pride rooted in awareness. Awareness that you are covered. Awareness that you are called. Awareness that what is on your life required divine intervention to protect. Think about that. Heaven intervened for you. Not because you begged perfectly. Not because you performed flawlessly. But because you belong to purpose. There are countless people who never realize how many unseen battles God fought on their behalf. But you're beginning to see the pattern. The doors that randomly closed. The alliances that unexpectedly dissolved. The opportunities that mysteriously resurfaced. It wasn't randomness. It was sovereignty. And now that you recognize it, something inside you settles. You're not anxious about the next step the way you used to be. You're not obsessing over timelines the way you once did. There's a steadiness in you. Because you've lived through proof. Proof that God can override. Proof that God can restore. Proof that God can reposition. And here is the part that should make you stand taller. The same people who once thought they were determining your outcome are no longer the defining voices in your story. They may still exist. They may still observe. But they no longer intimidate. Why? Because you've seen what happens when God has the final word. And once you've seen that, fear loses its grip. You are not the person they evaluated months ago. You are not the version they tried to categorize. Pressure changed you. Waiting matured you. Silence refined you. You carry yourself differently now. You speak with weight. You decide with discernment. You move with intention. That is growth. And growth is undeniable. There will come a moment soon, and you'll feel it when it happens, where the shift becomes visible. It may not be dramatic. It may not be loud. But it will be undeniable. A conversation that sounds different. An opportunity that fits perfectly. A recognition that feels earned but also divinely timed. When it happens, don't downplay it. Receive it. Because this isn't luck catching up to you. This is alignment unfolding for you. And as you step into it, you won't carry bitterness from what almost happened. You won't carry the need to expose who opposed you. You won't even need applause. You will carry peace. The kind of peace that says, God handled it. The kind of peace that allows you to build without fear of hidden sabotage. The kind of peace that allows you to lead without insecurity. Chosen one, you should feel secure right now. Secure that your life is not fragile. Secure that your destiny is not easily stolen. Secure that what God authors cannot be quietly edited by human hands. And yes, you should feel proud. Proud that you didn't collapse. Proud that you stayed faithful when you didn't understand. Proud that you didn't retaliate when you could have. Proud that you trusted God enough to let Him defend you. That pride is healthy. It anchors you. It reminds you that you are not here by accident. And as you continue walking forward, there will be new rooms. Bigger rooms. Louder rooms. More influential spaces. But you will enter them differently now. Not hoping to be chosen, but knowing you already are. Let that settle in your spirit. They tried to decide your future without God. But God decided it long before they spoke. And now you walk forward not as someone who survived hidden opposition, but as someone who was preserved for visible purpose. Stand in that. Move in that. Build in that. Because what is ahead of you is no longer vulnerable to private conversations. It is sealed by divine authority. And this time, when doors open, you will not wonder if you belong there. You will know.